The ice axe had dried blood on the metal head, frozen solid for 12 years. Michael Chen found it 3 feet from a weathered journal wrapped in torn fabric, both buried in a melting ice ridge near Camp 4 on Mount Everest. The journal belonged to David Martinez, expedition leader of the 5-man team that vanished in 2012. The final entry, written in a shaking hand, read, "He snapped Paranoia, accused us of plotting. He took the axe. I'm the last one left." Next to the journal lay a single boot and 5 oxygen masks, each tagged with names that had haunted rescue teams for over a decade. These weren't amateur climbers who got lost in a storm. David Martinez had summited Everest twice. James Fletcher was a former Navy SEAL who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. Tom Bradley had guided climbers up Denali for 15 years. Ryan Murphy was a doctor who specialized in high-altitude medicine. Alex Stevens was 26 years old and had already climbed 6 of the 7 summits. Together, they had more than 40 years of mountaineering experience between them. On May 12, 2012, they entered the death zone above 26,000 feet, where the air contains 1/3 the oxygen of sea level and the human body begins dying within hours. How does a team of elite climbers simply disappear without leaving a single trace? How do 5 men, their tents, their gear, and their bodies all vanish on the most monitored mountain in the world? The answer was written in blood and buried in ice, waiting 12 years for the glacier to give up its secret. The expedition started perfectly, where the reports showed a clear window opening on May 13th. The team had spent 3 weeks acclimatizing, their bodies slowly adapting to the thin air. They'd cached supplies at each camp, established relationships with the Sherpa guides, and tested every piece of equipment twice. Martinez had organized 17 successful expeditions. Fletcher had survived combat in Helmand Province. Bradley knew every crevasse on the mountain. Murphy had treated altitude sickness in climbers from around the world. Stevens had the stamina of someone half his age and twice his experience. Nothing in their backgrounds suggested they were capable of what happened next. The last radio contact came at 11:47 p.m. on May 12. Martinez reported they'd established camp at 27,200 feet just below the Hillary Step. Visibility was perfect. Wind speeds were manageable. The team was healthy, hydrated, and ready for their summit push at 3 a.m. His voice was calm, confident, routine. He signed off with "See you on top." 6 hours later, when they failed to check in, base camp assumed they were focused on the climb. By noon, when they still hadn't made contact, rescue teams began moving up the mountain. What they found defied explanation. The campsite was empty, not abandoned, not destroyed by wind or avalanche. Empty. The tents were gone. The sleeping bags were gone. The stoves, the food, the water bottles, the spare oxygen tanks, the emergency flares, the satellite phone, the GPS units, the first aid kit, the rope, the ice axes, the crampons, the headlamps, the extra clothing, and the backup radio were all gone. 5 men and several hundred pounds of gear had vanished as if they'd never existed. Rescue teams spent 8 days searching every crevasse, every icefall, every possible route the team might have taken. Helicopters scanned the mountain from base camp to summit. Experienced climbers rappelled into crevasses deep enough to swallow buildings. Sherpa guides checked every camp, every established route, every known shelter between 26,000 and 29,000 feet. They found nothing. No fabric caught on rocks, no metal glinting in the snow, no disturbed ice that might indicate a fall or avalanche. The mountain had swallowed 5 men completely. The theories started immediately. Avalanche was the most popular explanation, but rescue teams found no evidence of recent snow movement in the area. Altitude sickness could cause disorientation, but all 5 men were experienced at extreme altitude. Equipment failure might explain 1 death, but not 5 simultaneous disappearances. A sudden storm could have pushed them off course, but weather reports showed clear skies for the entire window. Some suggested they'd fallen into a crevasse, but their planned route avoided all known ice falls. The families refused to accept the disappearance. Martinez's wife hired private investigators. Fletcher's military buddies organized their own search expeditions. Bradley's climbing partners spent every spring season for 3 years searching the mountain. Murphy's medical colleagues funded high-tech scanning equipment to detect bodies under the ice. Stevens' parents offered a $50,000 reward for any information. Nothing worked. The mountain kept its secret. For 12 years, the mystery became legend. Climbers shared stories about the vanished team around base camp fires. Documentaries explored every theory. Books were written about the disappearance. Internet forums debated possibilities ranging from government cover-ups to Yeti attacks. The 5 men became ghosts, their story a cautionary tale about the mountain's power to erase human existence without explanation. Climate change solved the mystery. Rising temperatures caused glaciers to retreat faster than ever before. Ice that had been solid for decades began melting, revealing objects that had been frozen in time. In March 2024, a climbing team led by Michael Chen was establishing a new route when they noticed something dark protruding from an ice wall near Camp Ivy. The object was 3 feet long, made of metal and wood, with a sharp edge that caught the sunlight. Chen recognized it immediately. Every mountaineer knows the distinctive shape of an ice axe, the tool that can mean the difference between life and death on a vertical ice face. But this axe was different. The metal head was stained dark brown, the color of old blood, frozen solid. The wooden handle was splintered near the grip, as if someone had used it for something other than climbing. 3 feet away, wrapped in what remained of a torn sleeping bag, Chen found a journal bound in waterproof material. The journal belonged to David Martinez. His name was written inside the front cover in the same careful handwriting that filled the first 30 pages with routine expedition notes, weather reports, equipment checks, team morale assessments, route planning details, and supply inventories. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested what was coming. The entries were professional, methodical, exactly what you'd expect from an experienced expedition leader keeping careful records. Page 31 changed everything. The handwriting became erratic, the words smeared as if written in extreme cold or extreme stress. The entry was dated May 13, 2012, just hours after the team's last radio contact. Martinez wrote, "Ryan's been acting strange since we left Camp 3, keeps checking his oxygen levels, even though his gauge shows normal. Asked me 3 times if I trusted the Sherpa guides. Asked James if he thought someone was following us. Tom thinks it's altitude sickness. But Ryan's been higher than this before." The next entry, written the same day, was worse. Ryan confronted Alex about the route. Said Alex was trying to lead us into a trap. Alex hasn't been within 50 feet of the front of our line all day. James tried to calm Ryan down, but Ryan accused him of being part of whatever Alex was planning. I've seen altitude psychosis before, but this feels different. More focused, more paranoid. I'm watching him carefully now. The final pages were chaos. Martinez's handwriting deteriorated into barely legible scrawl. The words were rushed, desperate, written by someone who knew he was running out of time. The entry was dated May 14, 2012, 36 hours after their last radio contact. Ryan snapped completely. Said we were all plotting against him. Said we were going to leave him on the mountain. He grabbed the ice axe from the equipment pile and started swinging. James tried to stop him. Ryan caught him in the chest. James went down hard. Tom tried to run, but there's nowhere to go at 27,000 feet. Ryan got him in the back. Alex was next. I thought I could reason with him, but Ryan's eyes were completely gone. No recognition, no humanity, just terror and rage. The journal continued for 3 more pages, each entry shorter and more desperate than the last. I'm hiding behind the equipment cache. Ryan's looking for me. He's been calling my name for 2 hours. His voice doesn't sound human anymore. I can hear him moving around the campsite, dragging something heavy. I think he's moving the bodies. I have to get out of here, but I can't feel my fingers anymore. The cold is taking over. I know I'm not going to make it down alone. The final entry was a single sentence, written in letters so shaky they were barely readable. I'm the last one left and I can hear him coming. Martinez never made it down. Chen found his body 40 feet from where the journal was buried, perfectly preserved in the ice. His face was turned upward, eyes closed, mouth open in what might have been a scream or a prayer. The cold had mummified him completely. He looked like he'd died yesterday, not 12 years ago. Next to his body, Chen found 4 oxygen masks, each tagged with names that matched the missing climbers. The 5th mask, the one with Ryan Murphy's name, was missing. Murphy's body was never found. Neither were the bodies of Fletcher, Bradley, or Stevens. The ice axe, the journal, Martinez's corpse, and the oxygen masks were the only evidence of what happened during those final hours in the death zone. The mountain had kept it secret for 12 years, and when it finally revealed the truth, it was more horrible than any of the theories that had circulated in the climbing community. High-altitude psychosis is a documented condition. Above 26,000 feet, the human brain begins to shut down from oxygen deprivation. Hallucinations are common. Paranoia is expected. But what happened to Ryan Murphy was beyond standard altitude sickness. Investigators who examined Martinez's journal concluded that Murphy had experienced a complete psychological breakdown, possibly triggered by the extreme stress of the climb combined with oxygen deprivation and exhaustion. The attack happened at night, when the team was most vulnerable. Murphy used their isolation against them. Knowing that at 27,000 feet, there was no escape and no help coming, he killed 4 experienced climbers with a single ice axe, then disappeared into the death zone with their bodies. How he managed to dispose of 4 corpses and several hundred pounds of equipment remains unknown. The glacier may have swallowed everything, or Murphy may have found a crevasse deep enough to hide his crimes. Murphy's medical background made the attack even more chilling. As a doctor specializing in high-altitude medicine, he understood exactly how the thin air would affect his teammates' reaction time and decision-making ability. He knew they would be slower, weaker, less capable of defending themselves. He used his medical knowledge to become the perfect predator in the world's most isolated killing ground. The families finally had answers, but the answers brought no peace. Martinez's wife learned that her husband had spent his final hours hiding in terror, watching his friends die one by one. Fletcher's military buddies discovered that the man who'd survived 3 combat tours had been killed by a teammate he'd trusted completely. Bradley's climbing partners found out that 15 years of mountain experience hadn't saved him from a simple ice axe in the hands of a madman. Stephen's parents learned that their son had died at 26 not from the mountain's dangers, but from human evil. The discovery changed everything about how expeditions approach the death zone. Climbing teams now undergo psychological evaluations before attempting extreme altitude climbs. Emergency protocols include procedures for dealing with team members who show signs of paranoid behavior. The ice axe has been redesigned with safety features that make it harder to use as a weapon. Medical professionals climbing above 26,000 feet face additional scrutiny about their mental state and behavior patterns. Ryan Murphy's body remains somewhere on Mount Everest, possibly buried in a crevasse or hidden in an ice cave that hasn't melted yet. Climate change continues to reveal objects that have been frozen for decades. Every spring, as temperatures rise and glaciers retreat, there's a chance that Murphy's final resting place will be exposed. When that happens, the mystery will be complete, and the mountain will have given up its last secret about the 5 men who entered the death zone together but never came home. The journal, the ice axe, and Martinez's body are now stored in the facility in Kathmandu, evidence of the darkest crime ever committed at extreme altitude. The oxygen masks with their carefully written name tags serve as a memorial to 4 men who died not from the mountain's dangers, but from the breakdown of human trust in the world's most unforgiving environment. Their story has become a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of extreme altitude climbing, where the greatest threat isn't always the mountain itself, but the person climbing next to you. The investigation into Murphy's breakdown revealed details that made the crime even more disturbing. His medical records, obtained by investigators 12 years after the incident, showed he'd been taking medication for anxiety and depression for 3 months before the expedition. The drugs were standard treatments that shouldn't have caused violent behavior, but combined with oxygen deprivation and extreme stress, they may have triggered the psychotic episode that killed 4 men. Murphy had lied on his expedition medical forms. He'd checked no for all questions about mental health medications, psychological treatment, and history of anxiety disorders. The forms required complete honesty about medical conditions that could affect performance at extreme altitude. Murphy's deception wasn't just unethical, it was criminally negligent. His decision to hide his mental health issues and medication use created the conditions that led to the deaths of 4 experienced climbers. The medication bottles were never found. Murphy had either thrown them away before the climb or destroyed them after the attack, without physical evidence of the drugs. Investigators couldn't determine the exact dosage or confirm which medications might have interacted with the extreme altitude. The medical records showed prescriptions for sertraline and lorazepam, both common treatments for anxiety and depression, but both capable of causing unpredictable reactions when combined with severe oxygen deprivation. Murphy's colleagues at the hospital where he worked reported strange behavior in the weeks before the expedition. Dr. Sarah Chen, who worked alongside Murphy in the emergency department, told investigators that Murphy had become increasingly paranoid about hospital politics. He'd accused colleagues of undermining his work, questioned the motives of nurses he'd worked with for years, and claimed that hospital administration was plotting to destroy his career. The accusations were baseless, but Murphy seemed genuinely convinced they were true. The paranoia had extended to his personal life. Murphy's ex-wife, divorced from him 2 years before the expedition, described increasingly erratic behavior during their final months together. He'd accused her of having affairs with men she'd never met, installed security cameras throughout their house without telling her, and confronted neighbors about imaginary threats to their property. She'd filed for divorce after Murphy threatened a mailman he believed was stealing their correspondence. Murphy's climbing partners from previous expeditions painted a different picture. On mountains, he'd been calm, rational, and extremely competent. He'd successfully guided climbers up Denali, Aconcagua, and Kilimanjaro without incident. His technical skills were exceptional, his judgment sound, and his ability to handle emergencies had saved lives on multiple occasions. The transformation from competent mountain guide to paranoid killer seemed to happen only at extreme altitude. The psychological evaluation Murphy underwent before the Everest expedition had missed every warning sign. The evaluator, Dr. Robert Hayes, administered standard tests for stress tolerance, decision-making under pressure, and group dynamics. Murphy passed every assessment with scores that placed him in the top 20% of expedition candidates. The evaluation lasted 3 hours and included no questions about medication use, mental health history, or previous episodes of paranoid behavior. Hayes defended his evaluation methods in testimony given to investigators in 2024. He argued that Murphy had deliberately concealed his mental health issues and medication use, making accurate assessment impossible. But climbing safety experts criticized the evaluation process as inadequate for detecting the kind of psychological instability that could manifest at extreme altitude. The incident led to major changes in how expedition members are screened for mental health issues. The impact on the climbing community was immediate and devastating. expedition leaders began requiring detailed psychiatric evaluations for all team members. Insurance companies started demanding mental health disclosures before covering extreme altitude climbs. Climbing organizations implemented new protocols for monitoring team member behavior during expeditions. The trust that had been fundamental to mountaineering for over a century was shattered by the revelation that a teammate could become a killer. Murphy's attack had lasted approximately 45 minutes, based on the timeline Martinez reconstructed in his journal. The killing began around 2 a.m., when most of the team was asleep or resting in their tents. Murphy had moved systematically from tent to tent, using the ice axe to kill each climber quickly and efficiently. His medical training had taught him exactly where to strike for maximum damage with minimum struggle. Fletcher had been the first to die. As the team's most experienced combat veteran, he represented the greatest threat to Murphy's plan. The journal described Fletcher waking up as Murphy entered his tent, but the former Navy SEAL was too weakened by altitude and cold to mount an effective defense. Murphy struck him twice in the chest, puncturing his lungs and heart. Fletcher bled out in less than 2 minutes, never making enough noise to alert the other team members. Bradley had been next. The experienced guide had been checking equipment outside the tents when Murphy emerged from Fletcher's tent covered in blood. Bradley had tried to run, but at 27,000 feet, running was impossible. Murphy caught him within 50 feet and struck him in the back, severing his spine. Bradley collapsed face first into the snow and died within minutes from blood loss and shock. Stevens had been the youngest and strongest team member, but his youth worked against him. When he heard the commotion outside, he'd unzipped his tent to investigate. Murphy was waiting for him. The ice axe caught Stevens in the throat, severing his carotid artery. He died instantly, his blood spraying across the tent fabric and freezing before it could drip into the snow. Martinez had survived the initial attack only because he'd been awake, making notes in his journal about the next day's summit attempt. He'd heard Fletcher's tent rustle and assumed someone was using the bathroom. When he heard Bradley's muffled scream outside, he'd looked through his tent flap and seen Murphy standing over Stevens' body, the ice axe dripping blood onto the snow. Martinez had grabbed his journal and emergency supplies and crawled out the back of his tent, using the equipment cache as cover. The disposal of the bodies remained the most disturbing aspect of the crime. Murphy had somehow moved for corpses and several hundred pounds of equipment without leaving any trace that rescue teams could find. The most likely explanation was that he'd found a crevasse deep enough to hide everything. But crevasses that large were rare in the area where the team had been camped. Alternative theories suggested Murphy had used his medical knowledge to dismember the bodies, making them easier to hide, but the journal contained no reference to such activities. Murphy's disappearance after the killings was equally mysterious. He'd left no tracks, no equipment, no indication of which direction he'd traveled. The death zone offered no shelter and no possibility of long-term survival without proper equipment. Most experts believed Murphy had died within hours of the attack, possibly falling into the same crevasse where he'd hidden the bodies, but without physical evidence, his fate remained unknown. The psychological autopsy conducted on Murphy in 2024 revealed a pattern of deteriorating mental health that had been building for years. Hospital records showed he'd been prescribed increasingly powerful medications for anxiety and depression. His performance evaluations had declined steadily, with colleagues noting increased irritability and difficulty working with others' patient. Complaints about his bedside manner had doubled in the year before the expedition. Murphy's financial records showed mounting debts and poor investment decisions. He'd borrowed heavily to fund the Everest expedition, taking out loans against his house and liquidating his retirement savings. The financial pressure may have contributed to his psychological breakdown, creating additional stress that manifested as paranoid behavior at extreme altitude. His decision to climb Everest appeared to be an attempt to escape his personal problems rather than pursue a lifelong dream. The families of Murphy's victims struggled with complex emotions about the revelation. Martinez's wife felt relief at finally knowing what had happened, but also anger at Murphy for destroying 5 families with his selfish decision to hide his mental health issues. Fletcher's children grappled with the knowledge that their father's military training hadn't protected him from a trusted teammate. Bradley's climbing partners felt betrayed by Murphy's violation of the fundamental trust that kept mountaineers alive in extreme conditions. Stevens' parents directed their anger at the expedition screening process that had failed to detect Murphy's instability. They filed lawsuits against the climbing company that had organized the expedition and the doctor who had cleared Murphy for extreme altitude climbing. The legal battles continued for 3 years, resulting in significant changes to how expedition members are evaluated and monitored during climbs. The climbing industry implemented new safety protocols based on the lessons learned from Murphy's crime. Expedition leaders now carry emergency communication devices that can summon help even from the death zone. Team members undergo continuous psychological monitoring during climbs, with specific protocols for identifying and managing paranoid behavior. Ice axes and other potentially dangerous equipment are secured when not in active use. Medical professionals applying for extreme altitude expeditions face additional scrutiny about their mental health history and current medication use. The screening process now includes interviews with colleagues, family members, and previous climbing partners. Background checks examine financial records, legal problems, and any history of violent or erratic behavior. The changes have made extreme altitude climbing safer, but they've also made it more difficult for climbers to maintain the privacy that had once been standard in the mountaineering community. Murphy's crime changed the fundamental nature of expedition climbing. The trust that had allowed strangers to risk their lives together on the world's most dangerous mountains was replaced by suspicion and constant monitoring. Team members now watch each other for signs of psychological breakdown. Equipment is secured against potential misuse. Emergency protocols include procedures for restraining team members who pose a threat to group safety. The psychological impact on the climbing community extended far beyond safety protocols. Veteran mountaineers reported difficulty trusting new climbing partners. Expedition leaders spent more time managing team dynamics and less time focusing on technical climbing challenges. The joy and camaraderie that had defined mountaineering for generations was replaced by an atmosphere of constant vigilance and suspicion. Mount Everest has claimed more than 300 lives since climbing began in the 1920s. Most died from avalanches, falls, altitude sickness, or exposure. But David Martinez, James Fletcher, Tom Bradley, and Alex Stevens died from something far more terrifying: the realization that in the death zone, where survival depends on absolute trust, the person you're trusting might be the one who kills you. Their story proves that sometimes the most dangerous thing on the world's tallest mountain isn't the cold, the wind, or the lack of oxygen. Sometimes it's the person wearing the rope next to you, carrying an ice axe, and slowly losing their mind in the thin air where humans were never meant to survive.